Hi, I'm Malika Bilal and you're in the stream. Today, a check-in on 3 hashtags and the stories around them that caught our eye. A potential win for public school teachers in the U.S. state of West Virginia after a 9-day strike that kept students out of the classroom and educators gathered at the state capitol. Then to South Africa. What impact will a controversial proposal for land expropriation have? But first, to the border between Ireland and Northern Ireland, an issue that continues to be challenging in Brexit negotiations.
I'm Colin Moylan, I'm in Dublin, and last year on the stream I made the charge that in its vote for Brexit, the UK failed to consider the implications on the Good Friday Agreement and the invisible land border currently shared between Northern Ireland and the Republic. Now, in a little over a year's time, the island of Ireland is set to be split into EU and non-EU territories. And yet, the population here, both north and south, have failed to get an answer to the fundamental question. And that's, how do we avoid returning to a hard border and the potential civil unrest that comes alongside that in such a situation?
The 500-kilometre border between Ireland and Northern Ireland is possibly one of the biggest obstacles in Britain's departure from the EU. And there's no agreed plan of what it will look like after May 2020. British Prime Minister Theresa May has made several speeches in the past week outlining her vision for the UK's future economic relationship with the EU and its exit strategy. She's ruled out the return to physical infrastructure on the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic, but provided few details. She's also pushing for a free trade deal that many EU lawmakers have criticized. Here to help us talk about this, Peter Geoghegan, an Irish investigative journalist and writer. Welcome to the stream, Peter. I want to start with a comment from a member of our community via Twitter. This is Ian, who says he's in Northern Ireland and says that our economy and infrastructure is heavily subsidized by the EU. Also, our agriculture, which is deeply entwined with Ireland's in production and process. No one wants a hard border, which would cost billions and I reckon adversely affect funding in more important areas like health and education. So, Peter, what could the possible return of a hard border mean for people on either side of it?
Well, in some respects, there's never been a hard border in Ireland. There was, up until about 25 years ago, customs checks and security points along the border. And as you mentioned, the border is about 500 kilometres long. It has 250 road crossings. Up until around 25 years ago, only about 25 of those were open at any one time. And I think the big concern around the border now is we could go back to that sort of situation where you had to have customs checks, you might have the physical infrastructure at the border, which is something, no, it doesn't exist at the moment. If you went to the Irish border now at the moment, you wouldn't even know where the border started and where it ended. Often how people tell where they are is using their mobile phones. What towers it ping off? Is it in the Republic or is it in Northern Ireland? And the other big thing is road signs. We use miles in the UK and they use kilometres in the Republic of Ireland. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. So any change at the border at all will be seen as a big change for the people who live in the community in the area.
Especially because so many people are saying that the reason that the border is soft as it is today is, of course, because of the Good Friday Agreement, which ended tensions known as the Troubles for so many years. So you have people saying the potential beginning of a hard border would significantly change things and could raise tensions. Do you think that there's any truth to that?
I think there is some concerns around this, because one of the reasons that they were able to get rid of the border really was because both the United Kingdom and Ireland joined the European Union at the same time. We joined in 1973 alongside the British, and that meant that in the early 90s, when we both joined the European exchange rate mechanism, our economies became even closer together. That meant that all physical checks were able to go away because we're both part of the single market and the customs union. What's going to happen as of March of next year, the way things are going, is that the United Kingdom are going to leave the customs union and the single market. The Republic of Ireland will stay in it. that will mean that there will have to be some sort of a customs presence. And the concern, I think, for a lot of people is that the very fact of having something on the border could become something that, you know, for dissident Republicans, people who are opposed to the peace process, it could become a target. So the head of the police service of Northern Ireland has mentioned this, and I think there is a concern in border communities that anything that changes the dynamic in these communities. One of the successes of the peace process has been the border. It's been this for previously, when I was growing up near the border, we would have huge tailbacks trying to cross the border. You could be a couple of hours only going a few miles because of the nature of it. They're all totally disappeared. And the concern is that anything that changes that dynamic, it mightn't necessarily lead to violence, it mightn't necessarily lead to something, you know, very quickly, but it will undermine this kind of co-relationship that has existed on the island of Ireland, and especially around the border, which during the Troubles, this 30-year-long basically civil war in which more than 3,000 people died, the border was a very fractious place.
Right.
Now the border is a very calm place. And I think the concern is for people is that anything that changes the border can only have a negative impact. I think people can't see what could a positive impact of a change of the border be.
So Peter, you may have just answered this question we got via Twitter. This is Stephen. He says, as for Brexit, there are people talking up to a threat to the peace process because of it. The only threat to peace is violence. So my question to those talking it up is, who is it that is going to return to violence? I believe they're using that threat as a weapon in their negotiations. Do you think that this is a weapon or being used to scare people? It's a fear-mongering tactic?
I think sometimes the conversation on the Good Friday Agreement hasn't always been helpful. I think some people across, at a British level, are talking about the Good Friday Agreement. They're opposed to Brexit and they're using the Good Friday Agreement as a reason to oppose Brexit. And I can understand why they do it. That's not always been helpful, I think. I think sometimes it's because it's politicised Northern Ireland, politicise the Good Friday Agreement, and again this idea that there will be that people are saying, oh, it will lead to violence, so this is something to be worried about. But at the same time, I think it is important to understand how important this open border is symbolically. You know, the Good Friday Agreement was all about recognising the right of people in Northern Ireland to be Irish, British, or to be both. And part of being Irish for a lot of these people is that they can travel easily with no disruption across the island of Ireland.
Right.
That the fact that they live in Northern Ireland and they can feel Irish means that they can travel across the border into the Republic of Ireland without any problem at all. And I think the fear for a lot of people, including for the police, is that any change to this border setup, any kind of introduction of anything that looks like a checkpoint, it could become a target. And we know in the history of Northern Ireland
so
that
Peter
when things
Geoghegan,
become targets.
I hear that point. Thank you for making it. I think you answered the person's tweet pretty eloquently there. So we have to leave it there for now. We know this is a big issue with our community, though, so we want you to keep those tweets coming and continue to follow along with this issue. And now to the U.S. state of West Virginia. Our colleagues at AJ Plus explain what's been going on.
The House passed the 5% raise. The Senate has not, so everybody's in front of the Senate. West Virginia went on strike back in 1990, but it was not to this magnitude like it is today. We have started a movement.
On Tuesday, West Virginia lawmakers said that a deal has been reached to deliver that 5% pay raise to teachers and all state employees, and the governor tweeted about it. So what's next for teachers of the state? With us is Rebecca Diamond, a second-grade teacher at Kellogg Elementary School in Huntington, West Virginia, who you just saw in that AJ Plus piece. Welcome to the stream, Rebecca. I pulled up here on my laptop the very tweet from Governor Jim Justice, who writes, "I'm very pleased to announce a 5% raise for teachers and all state employees. It's time we invest in education and help our teachers and our kids go back to the classroom with pride." Rebecca, first of all, I would say congratulations are in order for you. You've been rallying at the state capitol for days with thousands of other teachers. What was your reaction to this tweet and to the news just hours ago that a deal had been reached?
Well, my first thought was, okay, is this real? Is it really going to happen? Because we heard it last Tuesday and we heard it again today. So, once we found out that the House passed it, the Senate passed it, it was a celebration when we got to the Capitol. It was amazing.
You're not the only one. This is Ashley Stewart, who says teachers are ecstatic, though we're hesitant to celebrate until the legislation passes. This is a victory for education in West Virginia, but it's also a victory for the people of West Virginia. We have a long history of standing up for labor rights. So what is next? We know that there is supposed to be a signing ceremony later today on Tuesday. What happens next for you?
Well, they're supposed to sign it today at 3 o'clock. Governor Justice, the governor of West Virginia, and he's supposed to sign it at 3. The House has already passed it. The Senate has already passed it, so that's our last hurdle. And as of right now, I am assuming that we will be back in school tomorrow. We haven't heard official word yet.
Now, I want to give some context for our international community who may not quite understand why it is that teachers have been striking for the past 9 days. I pulled up this here. This is via CNN, but it is the very best edition of this that we've seen. This is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics on the average annual wages for teachers. West Virginia's teachers earn among the lowest pay in the nation, 48th. And that's according to the National Education Association, a ranking of salaries. Average salary, $47,000, while in West Virginia, while the national average is $59,000. I know that you work a part-time job in addition to being a teacher. What will this 5% raise mean for you?
It could possibly mean that I won't have to work a second job. I took that job because we were one of the lowest paid in the state of West Virginia, and my husband is a teacher as well, so to make ends meet, it was just feasible for me to take on that second job to make up at different times of the month what we were missing with our pay, being 48th in the nation. I mean, when you look at that $45,000, I don't believe that's a true amount of what West Virginia makes, that because they average it from the highest to the lowest paid teacher in the state. So, I have 19 years of experience, and right now I'm right around $40,000. My husband has a master's, and he's right around $45,000. So with this pay raise, our additional household income will be $4,000 for the entire year, which will definitely make a difference in our livelihood for sure. We finally got a livable wage.
And I think, though, there might be some people in our online community and global community that still don't understand the fact that you had to work 2 jobs in the first place, being a state employee.
Right. I should have never had to have done that. But, I have 2 kids of my own, and, I want to provide for them as well. And there are things that they need. They're both in high school, and taking on this second job, kind of put us over the hump each 2-week period that we got paid, so that we weren't struggling to do what they needed, or struggling when something came up, because there's always something unexpected, and there was just never enough to cover that. So to have this second job, it provided for those things that came up unexpected, and at the end of those 2-week periods, and you're like, oh my gosh, we have 3 more days to wait. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And, I would have the second job pay that would cover those. And, you never assume that you're going to have to work another job when you have a degree.
Right. Well, this protest and this strike action has caught the eyes of people around the world. I want to share this tweet from Jerry White, who writes, Australian teacher sends message of support to West Virginia. Your determined fight has given a lead to teachers in the U.S. and internationally. So keeping that in mind, this was a movement led by women mostly. And of course, there are other people who are teachers as well. But this was headed and spearheaded by women. Ashley Stewart says the governor may try to take credit for this, and the legislators may try to take the glory too, but ultimately it was the unity and persistence of West Virginia citizens of all sectors that brought about this change. I know that not only are you a teacher, but you come from a long line of teachers. Your mother, your grandmother, you have 2 sisters that are teachers. Now we hear news that there might be a strike coming to Oklahoma, where teachers are looking at the actions in West Virginia and considering a strike there. Do you think this is the start of a new movement, and what has that meant to you?
I think this has empowered people to realize that they can accomplish things that they thought were actually impossible to do. I mean, Oklahoma's 49th in teacher pay, and I think it's time that they stood up for themselves as well to show the world that, you know, it's not just West Virginia making this movement happen, that other states can follow along, other nations can follow along, to know that, you know, if you stand up for what you believe in, which is exactly what we teach our students in school, that this is a powerful idea. You know, women in America have always been put down below men, and for all of these women to be out here today, it is impressive to see their power and their support, and to let people know that, you know, we're not going to lay down anymore. We're not going to allow anybody to walk all over us. We are just as powerful as anybody else is in numbers.
Well, thanks for being with us today, Rebecca, and please keep us updated as you head back into the classroom. And now to a story that's been heating up on Twitter. The hashtag land expropriation is being tweeted across South Africa more than 150,000 times at last count to discuss the approval of a plan some say will reclaim land taken from Black people under colonial and apartheid rule. The sticking point? The current owners of the land would not be compensated. The leader of the Economic Freedom Fighters Party, Julius Malema, sparked the debate with an announcement to the National Assembly on February 27th.
For a lasting peace, security, and justice, land must be expropriated without compensation for equal redistribution. We would have failed those who came before us if we were to pay anyone for having committed a genocide.
Now, the online conversation around land expropriation ranges from expressions of support for reclaiming stolen possessions to criticism, pointing to the economic impact of a similar plan in Zimbabwe. Pierre writes, people are so eager for land expropriation without compensation, thinking they're getting back stolen property. It's a lie. You're violating the rights of fellow citizens, and you're giving the government the right to take land away from anyone. One day, that might be you. Well, others say the plan fuels what they call systemic racism against white South Africans. The debate around the plan follows petitions to Western governments on behalf of white South Africans. More than 16,000 people signed a petition asking Donald Trump to accept white South Africans into the U.S. 15,000 people signed this petition asking Malcolm Turnbull to accept white South Africans into Australia. And more than 62,000 signed a petition to the EU Council asking for white South Africans, quote, right to return to Europe, unquote. So how will this plan impact South Africans on both sides of the fray? Here with us to discuss the issue, Elmine du Plessis is Associate Professor of Law at Northwest University, and Sihle Ngobese is an industrial sociologist. Welcome to the stream, both of you. I want to start with this tweet we got from a member of our community, Skepe23, who says, it's not like Black people were compensated when whites got the land. This is a correction of the wrong that was done in the past. Sihle, do you see this in the same way, that this is attempting to address the wrongs of apartheid?
Well, in short, there is an absolute need in South Africa for legitimate land restitution where there have been and where there is evidence of Black individuals who've been dispossessed historically. That's not in contention for anybody in this country. The issue becomes the means, and land expropriation without compensation is essentially giving the government the sort of power to confiscate property from individuals. And it isn't just white individuals, it's also Black individuals. Essentially what the EFF and the ANC have agreed to do is to tinker with our constitution, specifically Section 25, which deals with property rights. Now, these are rights which are fundamental to any democracy trying to build a prosperous and property-owning generation. And that's what Blacks and white South Africans want. And the EFF and the ANC are actually quite opposed to this if you really look at the logical conclusion of handing the state that sort of power to confiscate something without compensation.
I mean, taking that in mind, we got this from Jack, who says expropriation needs to happen as much as the debate does. Given the complexity of the topic, the discourse easily lends itself to populism. This increases the risk for quick and easy, irresponsible, unaccountable fixes, which could result in more unhappiness for the majority. Do you think that there is a way to do this so that it does not lead to unhappiness for the majority?
Yes, well, I think we need to take it into account that we had a
So we're going to attempt to re-establish that connection with Elmine, but in the meantime, Sichle, you see this tweet here. Do you think, I think I know where you're coming from on this, but do you think that there is a way to do this? Because there are people online who say that it should be done.
No, absolutely. Again, there is general consensus among South Africans that there are ways to do this. And these, of course, require a legal, rational, and methodical weighing up of the evidence and the data as it relates to specific land claims. Now, this, again, is done through the rule of law. And there's always, and there should be, adequate compensation. Because one thing we need to remember is that, historically, whether you look at the colonial era in this country or the apartheid era, it was always the institution of government which used coercive manipulative power in order to dispossess one group over the other. And essentially, I'm advocating that it's that very same government today, albeit democratically elected, that has to now enact a process of restitution where it must compensate those who it will dispossess in order to return land back to its original inhabitants. And by the way, there's also another element here. We have hard data in this particular instance. 93% of people who've had land returned back to them have actually historically opted to take cash instead of land. Why? Because there is a recognition, by and large, that South Africans, not all of us are agrarian, not all of us want to do farming. A lot of us have moved into the cities and want to live middle-class lives, which don't necessarily involve farming.
Or have the means, or even have the means to farm and to live the agrarian lifestyle. It looks like your connection is back with us. What did you want to add?
No, I just want to add that I think we need to acknowledge that there has been a failure in land reform in South Africa. And this was also the finding of a high-level report by the Parliament last year. And this creates frustration, right? So we still have quite inequitable land holdings where white people have the majority of the land and black people most people are landless. So, that creates tension. And then fueled by that, we seem to be losing the contract that we made around 94 of, restorative justice, of going this about in a rights-based way, nation building and so on. That was all disconnected from the land reform issue. And now it seems that all that is playing out in the land reform arena, and that sort of creates opportunity, obviously, for populism. What frustrates me is that expropriation is a very, very technical issue. So what people think will happen and what will actually happen, they're two different things. Because even if you have expropriation without compensation, you still need to follow a legal process. You still need the state to implement or to expropriate property. And the state hasn't used its powers as it can in terms of the Constitution for the past 24 years to do land reform. So I think, why would the state, it's just so complex.
Sichle is shaking his head there. Doesn't look like he agrees. Sichle, we got this from YouTube. We got this from YouTube Live. I just want to read this first. Africa Azania says the Constitution does not allow for the expropriation of land without compensation. The ANC is setting itself up for failure. The government has plenty of land. Why not start there? Sichle?
Yeah, look, I would agree with that partially, but I just want to come back to this point of, land expropriation without compensation would follow a rule of law aspect. I'm sorry, but the record of history, especially on the African continent, would disagree with that. And we just have to look to our neighbors to the north in Zimbabwe to get that case example. I can cite other examples of Tanzania and the Ujamaa policy of Idi Amin, who expropriated property from Indian residents and essentially took over their businesses. Again, the underpinning behind this is socialism, and socialism on this continent has been a killer of African aspirations for one, prosperity, and two, liberty. So this idea that somehow giving the state the power to expropriate land, in other words, confiscate land.
I have to pause you there. I am pausing you though, and I'm saying thank you to you and Almin, because we will be following this story very closely, and we'll look to do a lengthier follow-up show. So we will be back to this. If there are any other stories on social catching your eye from members of our community, tweet us. #AJStream. Until then, we'll see you online.